growing up, and I got a lot of solace in science fiction and fantasy stories in particular, because it usually had heroes that were outsiders in their own communities, and I really identified with that kind of story. And I really wanted to embrace those hero characteristics and apply them to my own life. So I think I did that by reading about science fiction and fantasy heroes and learning from their journeys, and something that I could apply in my real life. I think I learned a lot about diplomacy by reading those stories, how people dealt with the monsters in their life, how they talked their way out of situations, how they embraced intellect. I think that's why I developed a love for science fiction and fantasy.
They are our moral plays of old. They are the equivalent of the Greek mythologies, the Egyptian mythologies. They teach a morality in a creative, interesting, individual way, present a very interesting, colorful, spectacular worlds to people, but also very real moral storytelling that have cultural and social implications that can really make people think.
I like fantasy a lot, and I like the idea of escapism. I think that that's why we do theater and why we make art, is to kind of experience something that we might not be able to attain, in our real life, but that mirrors and echoes things that we do actually experience. It brings you into a different world to make sense of the world that you're in. And I think that that's unique to fantasy and science fiction.
Superheroes, fantasy novels, Star Wars, these things were my bread and butter growing up. I can't imagine going through life as boring as this without at least picturing something cooler.
I think most good science fiction addresses a sort of a social issue or a moral issue, sort of illustrating a point in a way, and often you don't sort of realize it until afterwards, and then you think about it and you're like, wow. I think sci-fi at its best does that. But even Star Wars, even that has got sort of classic morality, and I think it does. I mean, obviously it's gotten into the public consciousness. I mean, adults now who grew up on this identify their morality through some of these characters.
I think it tells stories that we would never see anywhere else beyond literature or the stage or film. It's so magical and beyond anything we can comprehend. I mean, the science progresses beyond things that we've even been able to achieve, and there's new characters and creatures created every day that we would never be able to encounter otherwise. And so if I can insert myself into those worlds, then I say game on.
It was not something that I put together right away. I definitely had a love of theater, and I loved theatrical storytelling. Having this interaction between a live actor on stage was something that I was really fascinated in at an early age. And I also had a love of science fiction and fantasy stories, but putting them together really didn't hit me until I was in college, my sophomore year. We were talking a little bit about the living room play, about how everyone wanted to do those living room plays, and I admire Albee just as much as the next theater goer, but I was kind of tired of seeing that same play on stage, and I wanted to try something unique and different. When I pitched to do The Hobbit as one of my directing projects, and I was told no, because The Hobbit is a fantasy play, and it's this huge novel, and it would be super hard to do, and so why even try to do it, so I had to actually wait until my senior year and do my directing thesis on 1984, and I wanted to prove to everyone that yes, you can stage science fiction and fantasy on stage, you can have a message, it's not impossible, you have to be imaginative and think outside the box with these plays and these stories, but it can be done, and the effect that it can create can be something quite astounding and really capture an audience. The success of 1984 really propelled me to create a theater company that specifically does science fiction and fantasy stories and work.
Nobody tries to do it, and people will say that there are things you can't stage, and that's ridiculous. Because to say that is essentially to render your imagination useless. The reason why fantasy books and sci-fi books are so successful is that people are able to use their imagination. So why can't they use their imagination when they go to the theater?
My first impression was awesome idea, because I love science fiction and I've always thought it to be an interesting challenge to try to put it on stage, and I was heartened and gladdened to see somebody try to creatively and enthusiastically interpret something like that onto the stage for people, and I think it worked out really well.
I thought it was interesting. I did some research, and you guys had your Facebook group, and it dealt with science fiction fantasy, and I haven't run into a theater before that really focuses on that. And then it opened up a lot of new other things to me, such as, like, you know, Fahrenheit 451, Frankenstein. There are like all these other literary type shows that are not necessarily seen as science fiction, but can definitely be, you know, taken away from that.
I think there's a lot of conventional wisdom that sci-fi doesn't lend itself to theater because there are sort of practical limitations in theater. I think, you know, Tiffany really set herself up a challenge, you know, of how do you create these new worlds within these limitations, and that Otherworld is a small company with a limited budget, you know, it really forces you to be creative. So when I remember when I took Fahrenheit 451, I knew I liked working with Tiffany, but I was nervous. I was, you know, because I was like, you know, I like the story, but how are you going to do this? How is this going to work? And I remember Tiffany saying, "Don't worry, it'll work. We'll make it," you know. And she did. I mean, it really, I think it came off well.
Casting was actually quite simple for me. I pretty much knew, you know, 5 seconds in that these were the characters or the people that I wanted to spend the next 2 months with and go on this journey.
I think that because you did such a strong job casting it, it made the entire process so much easier. It wasn't something that I immediately realized, but as we got going during the process, everything became so natural. The way the characters kind of fit on us like clothes.
And I really like the people. They're good to work with. They know their stuff, and they're professional, and they're fun. They're good people.
I think that everybody complements each other like wonderfully. Like, I think we could all be on stage together all the time, and we wouldn't be stepping on each other's feet. And we all have an appreciation and real strong respect for I think the mission of what Otherworld's trying to do.
It's always a good experience, I think, to get on the ground floor of something. You have the opportunity to really invest yourself in other parts of the production, really create an ownership over it, whether that be donating your own books to the book wall and the set, or, you know, helping to build the set or hang lights, which some of the cast and crew did. It really builds a bond and a family for everyone involved, because it feels like a lot more like you own the whole process rather than just being a part of the process, singular and separated from everyone else.
I love fantasy, I love science fiction, and on top of that, I love being in front of the proverbial camera, as well as I love being behind it. I like helping piece it together and seeing what I can do to help bring it to life. So it was just kind of a win-win on every level, and made perfect sense to get involved with the organization.
I've always wanted to see more science fiction and fantasy in live theater, so I signed up and didn't look back.
It kind of reminds me of the old days of Steppenwolf when they talk about, well, we were in a church basement. Well, we were in my living room because we couldn't afford rehearsal space. So it was very intimate. You know, I had these group of people and I invited them into my house, and I couldn't pay them, so I felt really bad about it, but I always fed them. I wanted to make sure they were fed and that they were comfortable. They were helping me facilitate a dream, and I did not take that lightly. And I wanted to make sure that they felt that they were doing something important. I couldn't pay them monetarily, but maybe I could pay them with this great journey to take.
A lot of my favorite moments were kind of like talking about it almost, like exploring how to make these characters human within the realm of the world that they existed, because I thought that was a very challenging aspect, and like sitting down and talking about options and choices and stuff I thought was really interesting.
My favorite part was when we took the set and really transformed it to a world where, oh, this is exactly what I thought of in the book, or this is kind of clever in a way that I've never saw it before, and that was really fun. One of my favorite scenes is between Montag and Clarice. There was always a surreal kind of way that we played things, like the rain, the sound, the two actors in this world completely enveloped, and it brought you out to an other world, you know.
When I first saw the effect of the woman on fire, When I first saw the vision that Tiffany Keane had, the director, of putting that to life, really that for me was the moment when it clicked. We can do this. There are very creative, artistic ways that theater can portray the ideas that science fiction authors and their novels and their stories pose to people.
It was really impressive because I've only ever seen it on film. So to translate that on a stage already is kind of a difficult concept in your head. There's that dynamic of peeling back the wallpaper, be like, how are they going to do it? What's going on? And I thought they erred very much on the minimalist side, but it worked actually to the advantage of the story. It was certainly adhered to the idea of less is more. I loved the feel, and everything was right on point. It was beautifully performed. I thoroughly got chills when the dogs came on, the effects that you guys created, because it was very much theater of the mind aspect, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
And it was such an incredible experience on so many different levels, which is why, the entire time I was in it, I was like, I hope this turns into something bigger. I hope that these are people that I can continue to work with. There was something about the whole process that I just believed so much in.
I would love for Otherworld to have its own space. I think it's really important for a science fiction and fantasy theater company to have their own space. So right when you walk in the door, this is a magical place. A place that people can relish in their science fiction and fantasy geekdom. A place for our patrons to go and know that they are in Otherworld space. I think that's really important to me.
I would like to see Otherworld Theater go in a direction where they can handle and take on larger projects that require much more flight of fancy, I guess. As you start out as a theater, you don't have the budget for necessarily the big special effects or anything. We kind of make do with what we have.
It's bringing adventure and action to theater, which I think is something that's really missing. I think there's drama and comedy in theater, and I think there's this huge gap that has been kind of responsible for the decline in interest in theater over the last 50 years or so. I feel that my hope for Otherworld is that it can bring people back to theater by bringing them some of the things that have been lacking in theater for so many decades. And a lot of that is action and adventure, things that, excite people, but that they don't expect to see when they go to the theater. I think that Otherworld's found a way to offer that.
I want to demonstrate more of the capability that science fiction can bring to live theater, and fantasy can too. I want to prove to people that it's not all about the special effects and all about the flair. It's the relationships. I just want us to really bring the party to Chicago, I guess.